Good afternoon. This is a tough act to follow. The great Chris Kasha, a very funny video. But we're here today on a really terrific topic, creativity and passion in leadership. Hard to get your arms around that, isn't it? That's a pretty big concept, creativity and passion in leadership. Everybody wants to be a leader, but it's hard to figure out how to do it sometimes. And what does it mean? Well, I think the other way of saying what our topic is today is that leadership requires creativity and passion. Creativity to think big, to present a big plan, to have a vision that can inspire and motivate. And then the passion to communicate that vision, to in turn motivate people, to give them a reason to reach out and accomplish that big plan you've just shared. You have to have a vision and you have to share a vision in order to provide leadership. Chris talked about that in terms of being a comedian, that there has to be something more than the mechanical jokes. So you can't just have the big plan. Then maybe you're just a prophet. But you've got to be able to communicate that plan and inspire. You've got to be able to connect with the audience. You have to show people the mountaintop and then take them there, or at least demonstrate to them how to get there. And it's a skill that in the line of work I've spent most of my life in, which is politics and government, it's not as common as you would like it to be among our political leaders, not as common as you would think it would be to be able to demonstrate the creativity of big ideas and the passion of how to motivate people to accomplish those great ideas. Has anybody here ever heard of Daniel Hudson Burnham? 100 years ago you would have, I believe. He was then very famous in America as an architect and an urban planner. He designed the Flatiron Building in New York. He designed Union Station in Washington. He did urban planning in Washington and Cleveland and Chicago. Well, on April 17th, of 1906, he presented to the town fathers of San Francisco a whole new plan for the development of the city of San Francisco. At 5 a.m. the next morning, they had the earthquake and the city burned down. And you could say, wow, he was there at the right time with his new plan. He had that vision, and he had presented it literally the day before the earthquake, the day before the destruction of San Francisco. What better timing could he have had? But it turns out it didn't work. The city fathers chose another way to redevelop and rebuild. And Burnham, for all of his timeliness, didn't make the connection. He wasn't able to sell the plan. He wasn't able to take them to the mountaintop that he had shown them with his plan. He very famously said, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood." Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood. It's interesting he used the word magic. He understood that special connection between a big idea and the ability to inspire people to reach for it. Unfortunately for his commissions and his fees that year, he wasn't able to get the job in San Francisco. But he had the understanding that you have to make big plans, and you have to be able to stir men's blood. Now, Lyndon Johnson said, "What convinces is conviction. If you don't believe what it is you're advocating, then you are as good as dead." A good earthy phrase, as good as dead, if you don't believe in what you're saying. What convinces is conviction. So you have to feel in your heart and your emotions the wisdom of the ideas that you're advocating. You have to feel that, and then you have to be able to communicate that. And what I believe is the secret to this is that as you reach out to communicate, as you try to inspire, as you try to motivate, as you try to take people to that mountaintop, you've got to bring it. You've got to bring with your emotion and your commitment the ideas that you have. And I'm not just talking about government or politics. I mean, this is true in the business world. It's true in the classroom. It's true on the comedy stage, as Chris told us. It's true in the nonprofit world. It's true in neighborhood organization. You've got to bring it. You've got to motivate people, and you do that by throwing yourself all in. Now, I can't think of a politician, again, from my line of work, who did that more effectively than Bill Clinton. Whether you agreed with his positions or not, or admired him or not, this was a man who knew how to bring it. In the fall of 2010, 10 years out of office, he was campaigning in Norristown for the Democratic ticket. And he made a speech at the George Washington Carver Center in Norristown. Spoke well. The crowd loved it. He did all the things a politician's supposed to do. Talked to the folks that are on the stage, thanked the leadership of the George Carver Center. Finished his speech and started to work the rope line. And my friend Jim Mesa was standing on the rope line, and he had been a delegate for Carter 18 years before, in 1992 in New York. So when the former president got down there, Jim Mesa said, "Hello, Mr. President, I was a delegate for you 18 years ago, just trying to make that connection." And Clinton lit up and talked to him, and then he said to Mesa, "How'd I do?" Jerked his thumb back at the podium behind him, said, "How'd I do?" And Jim Mesa was really flattered. And he started to tell the former president of the United States how he did. And then he stopped himself and realized, this is ridiculous. This is a former president, international humanitarian, international statesman. Who am I to be telling him how he did? But there was something in Bill Clinton that reached out to people, connected with people, always was asking people, how am I doing? What do you think? How can I do a better job? And that was part of what made Clinton the effective politician that he was. A friend of mine said, Bill Clinton always brings it. And that is what we need to do if we want to provide leadership. Ronald Reagan used to bring it with a strong, upbeat message of morning in America, the shining city on a hill, which sort of inspired America and told us about the idea of American exceptionalism. So Ronald Reagan had that ability to communicate, to show a vision and communicate and inspire. Absolutely essential in leadership. Some other presidents, not so much. George Herbert Walker Bush, one of the finest men to ever serve as president, lifetime public servant and dedicated American, but not so good in terms of the connecting. You know the example I'm going to give, those of you that were paying attention to politics in 1992. In the middle of that presidential debate with Bill Clinton, when Bill Clinton is walking around the stage, moving up and talking to people, saying to people literally, "I feel your pain." He got mocked for that later, but he used to, "I feel your pain," and people loved it. President Bush was there looking at his watch. Do you remember that? Looked at his watch like, what the heck am I doing here? What was the message he would say? How soon can I get out of here? There's a million places I'd rather be right now than on this debate stage. Now, was he really thinking those things? I doubt it. And again, a good man. But he failed to bring it on national television. And I think that's one reason he lost that debate. And that may have been one reason why he lost that election. He didn't bring it. So how do you do it? I think it starts with the handshake. I think in personal relations, in the classroom, in the boardroom, in the grocery store, on the campaign trail, it starts with the handshake. Now, politicians have been accused of being so obsessive about shaking hands because we just want to make sure that the average citizen is still willing to touch us. But the basic human connection starts with that handshake. And how many times have you shaken someone's hand and they're kind of, looking over your shoulder to the next person? Or they're not making eye contact. They're not even looking at you. And we all know how bad that limp wrist is, that dead fish of a handshake. You got to look people in the eye and give them a hearty hand clasp and say, hey, it's nice to meet you. You've got to do that. When I was 22 years old, I was working on Capitol Hill, 1973. I worked for a congressman. He had a reception, and the then Speaker of the House, Carl Albert, came to the reception. Speaker of the House, I was 22 years old, very excited that he was coming to this reception. And a bunch of us lined up at the table there, young interns, young staffers, and the Speaker of the House went down the line introducing himself to us. Hi, glad to see you. Hi, glad to see you. Not making eye contact. Glad to see you. Hi, glad to see you. Didn't look at one of us, didn't make a connection, kind of blew right by and went on to make his comments and his remarks on behalf of my boss. I'll never forget it. Now, is it fair of me to hold this against Carl Albert almost 40 years later? No, it's not fair. But it made an impression on me, and not a good impression on me. The Speaker of the House went down the line, shook my hand, looking right into my belly button. Nice to see you, nice to see you. No eye contact, no passion. He didn't bring it. Maybe he brought it. I mean, he was a successful politician, right? Served in Congress 30 or 40 years, Speaker of the House. Maybe he brought it for other people, donors, big shots, but he didn't bring it to some lowly staffers on Capitol Hill that day. And I've never forgotten it. So, you got to start with the hearty handshake, and then you got to follow a couple of things. Well, one thing Tip O'Neill said, which is all politics is local. And I actually heard him say that in my college political science class. He was the congressman from Cambridge, and I went to Boston University. He came in before he was famous. He was in Congress, and he said all politics is local. And he said, I lost an election for state house many years ago by a couple of votes, and the next door neighbor said to me the next morning, sorry you lost, Tip. And I said, Mrs. McGillicuddy, thanks, but I know you voted for me. Thanks for your vote. And she said, well, Tip, I didn't vote for you. And he said, Mrs. McGillicuddy, I've cut your grass, I've delivered your newspaper, I've shoveled your sidewalk all these years. Why didn't you vote for me? And Mrs. McGillicuddy said, well, you didn't ask. And he never forgot that. He told that story. I heard that story in the classroom about 6 years before he made it famous. Once he became speaker, then he started writing books. And I was reading all the stories that I'd heard, reading in his books, the stories I'd heard in the classroom 6 years before. But all politics is local. And then there's a TIPS corollary that I've sort of made up. The best politics is the most personal politics. So, a face-to-face meeting with your boss, with someone you want to raise money from for your charity, someone you want to recruit to whatever you're doing, a face-to-face meeting is the best way to do it. If you can't get a face-to-face meeting, the next most personal is a phone call. If you can't get that, well, write a letter. And a handwritten letter, better than a typed letter. And then you fall down to email, which is badly abused, and then the hated robocalls. Forget about robocalls. They just make people mad. And emails, I think the society has just ruined the email. Too many emails. It's a lousy way to persuade anybody. You've got to make your contacts personal if you want to bring it, if you want to have a real impact. And when you make a speech, remember that it's a speech. It's not a reading, it's a speech. So it's okay to have notes. I guess Ted doesn't like notes, but it's okay to have notes. It's okay to have talking points, whatever is going to make you comfortable. But you can't just read the speech because it just doesn't come across as real, as human. It doesn't connect. You've got to speak to the people and make eye contact and try to inspire or motivate or persuade. Otherwise, you're wasting time. Otherwise, you could have just handed them a written copy and let them read it on their own. Now, some of the best speakers in history have had trouble getting through a speech. Winston Churchill famously broke down, at least that was in the headline of London newspaper in the 1920s when he stood up to speak in the House of Commons and he forgot what he was going to say. He always memorized his speeches. And that's okay if you can still look out and talk to people while you're giving the memorized speech. But he forgot it. And he broke down and had to sit down. So from then on, he wrote out all his speeches like he always did and had a typed copy with him, but he just held it in his hands as a crutch to make him confident. Hardly ever had to look at it. But he didn't fall into the habit of reading a speech. Which brings me to the bane of modern political existence, which is the teleprompter. Now, the teleprompter allows the business leader, the politician, whoever, to read a speech and to get every word right. And that's important sometimes. When the president is speaking to the Congress, State of the Union, you want to get every word right. But you're still reading the speech. And now you can fool people because you're looking from side to side and you're reading off the screen, but it looks like you're looking at the audience. But you're still reading a speech and you're losing some spontaneity. I think Barack Obama in 2008 was one of the most moving and evocative speakers, and I think his persuasive powers is one reason he became, a big reason why he became president. Since then, he's been using a teleprompter, and it's not quite the same. And I know teleprompters can be tricky. I used one in 1996 at the Democratic Convention, and there's a wonderful speech coach named Michael Sheehan who gives candidates lessons on how to use a teleprompter. So, you don't grab the lecture and you speak and you relax and you speak in a modulated tone and you turn from screen to screen. There's one right here, there's one across the hall, there's one right here, there's even one in the podium. There's 4 places you can look. And you're supposed to turn your body and look and talk and turn and read. And whatever you do, he says, don't stand there and jerk your head back and forth as you read from the panels, because you'll look like an idiot. And I was really nervous before this opportunity that I had as a candidate to speak. And I was having lunch with my wife, and I was pouring out all my insecurities about standing here and jerking my head back and forth, and I knew I was going to get it wrong, and it was going to be a disaster. And she listened to me for a while, and she said, honey, I have the answer. What is it? Just simplify. I said, well, how do I do that? She said, just stand there, look straight and continuously at the screen across the hall and read your speech, and while you're doing it, just turn your shoulders from side to side like this. And I laughed so hard that it relaxed me, and somehow I got through the speech. But the teleprompter can be a problem. And in my estimation, President Obama uses it too much because he's such a good speaker, it takes something away. I actually just got, and I think the wonderful technology here is going to have this on the board behind me, a fundraising appeal, a mass appeal from the First Lady that has a picture of their fist bump, the famous fist bump, which I really like. I get a kick out of it, and I kind of like the way Mrs. Obama always kind of lowers her head when she does it, and it kind of looks up at the president as if she's saying, don't mess up. But anyway, I'm not sure what she's thinking. But anyway, the fist bump is famous. But what do you see in the foreground? The teleprompter screen. Can you make it out? There's a teleprompter screen there in the foreground. So he had just finished his speech with a teleprompter, and now he's giving his wife the fist bump, and that's all very nice. But you look at it, and I'm sure this isn't the case, but it goes through my mind, well, I wonder if that teleprompter, if the last line as that teleprompter screen scrolled up said, now fist bump with Michelle. And of course it didn't say that. But that is the problem with the teleprompter. It takes away the spontaneity. It takes away the ability to communicate. And who can forget, speaking of bringing it, when Bill Clinton in 1994, making his health care speech to a joint session of Congress, the teleprompter broke. They had the wrong speech in there. And he's up there in front of the country on live TV in the Congress, and the wrong speech started to scroll. And you can see him turn to Al Gore, who was sitting behind him. Al Gore had to scurry down and get it fixed. But Clinton didn't miss a beat. He had memorized the healthcare speech so well, he just kept going. And it took him 4 or 5 minutes to fix the problem, and the audience literally couldn't tell. That's bringing it. Now, Another president wasn't exactly known for his great eloquence, George W. Bush. But under pressure one day, he brought it. He brought it big time. We'll all remember the horror of 9/11. The president visited the 9/11 site a week or two after that horrible tragedy. He's on the mound of rubble, you recall, making a speech to the firemen. And a couple of the firemen in the back are yelling out, "We can't hear you." You know, it's every speaker's nightmare. The sound system wasn't working. The bullhorn wasn't getting the job done. "We can't hear you, we can't hear you." And what did George Bush say? He said, "Well, I can hear you, and the world can hear you. And the people that brought these buildings down are going to hear us all soon." I think that's the greatest extemporaneous presidential remark in history. And it wasn't rehearsed, of course. There was no teleprompter, and no staff told him, "Well, prepare in case they can't hear you, you can say this, Mr. President." No, this just came to a man under pressure. And it was creative, and it took people to the mountaintop. It said, "Well, I can hear you, and the world can hear you, and we have a plan to get back at the guys that brought this building down," and it had the passion to connect with the audience. The president hears you guys, and we're going to do something about it. So you can bring that kind of creativity and that kind of passion to whatever it is you do, but you just have to bring it. Thank you.